The war is intensifying across Europe, rekindling discussions of a famous remark made by Vladimir Putin in 2005. He stated, "The collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. The fall of the powerful state he had known since childhood has never provided him with mental comfort." Putin's latent desire has always been the reconstruction of the Soviet Union. Many dismissed his comments at that time. However, the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the military invasion of Ukraine in 2022 have made it clear that Putin did not make those remarks lightly. The obstacle in the way of fulfilling Putin's dream has been the Western military alliance NATO and its primary power, the United States. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO has gradually expanded eastward, continually putting pressure on Russia. Currently, NATO is militarily far stronger than Russia. However, surprisingly, there's an invisible fear within NATO as well, primarily due to the possibility of a future world war. But the question arises, can Russia actually launch a major attack against such a military alliance? And how successful could Russia be against a powerful military coalition like NATO? The answers to these questions partially depend on the upcoming U.S. presidential election, which will take place in November 2024. Why is this election so crucial? In October 2023, an article was published in Stars and Stripes stating that Donald Trump has discussed with his campaign team and advisors. He has come to a conclusion. If he is elected President of the United States again, he will either withdraw the U.S. from NATO or keep it as a silent member within NATO. Article 5 of NATO is its fundamental principle, which states that an attack on any NATO member is considered an attack on the entire alliance and will be met with a collective response. Trump's main objection lies with this article. He believes that sending U.S. troops to start a war for many small countries like Latvia, Estonia, Montenegro, Albania, and Luxembourg is foolish. In Trump's view, starting a third world war over such small nations is not in the United States' interest. Another significant demand from Donald Trump regarding NATO is to include non-European countries in the alliance. He has specific reasons for this. According to Trump, NATO was established to counter three main threats: to stop the rise of the Soviet Union, to resist European nationalist militarism, such as the military powers of Nazi Germany, to manage the process of political integration in Europe. However, in the current context, Trump's view is that Russia's influence is now felt more in the Middle East and Southeast Asia than in Europe. Therefore, it no longer makes sense to restrict NATO to European countries. He believes NATO must evolve into a broader alliance that includes non-European nations. Although NATO is a military organization, its member states provide military personnel and resources in various ways. However, the reality is that 68% of NATO's funding comes from the United States. This enormous financial burden is a primary source of discontent for Trump. In his view, if NATO countries fail to increase their necessary military budgets, the U.S. has no obligation to protect them. Another core principle of NATO is that each member state must spend at least 2% of its total GDP on military expenditure. This was established in 2006, as NATO is a military alliance, and each state must contribute to enhancing its military capabilities. However, by the end of 2023, it was observed that out of 31 NATO member countries, only 11 were spending 2% of their GDP on military expenditure, while the others failed to meet this standard. In February 2023, at an election rally in South Carolina, Trump stated directly, if any NATO member country fails to spend 2% of its GDP, then the United States will no longer be responsible for their protection.
Don't pay, and we're attacked by Russia. Will you protect us? No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
This statement raises significant questions regarding NATO's future. If Trump wins the 2024 election and implements his policies, NATO member countries may face even greater financial and military pressure. Following the Russia-Ukraine war, European countries are now increasing their military budgets. For example, Germany has raised its military budget to $73.1 billion in 2023, which is 2.01% of its GDP. Previously, their military expenditure was only 1.57%. This budget increase aligns Germany with NATO's 2% GDP policy. Even NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has announced that NATO's military expenditure has increased by 11%, marking the highest in NATO's history. 18 countries have declared their agreement with NATO's 2% policy. However, the question remains, is merely increasing the budget sufficient? An article in the New York Times stated that NATO has evidently not been prepared for any major military operations in recent years. Experts believe that Russia now poses an existential threat to Europe. Russia's military aggression in Ukraine has become a significant challenge for NATO, and European countries must take urgent measures to secure themselves militarily. Will NATO engage in war with Russia? Many analysts argue that NATO is not prepared to engage in direct conflict with Russia. While it has provided direct military assistance to Ukraine, NATO still does not wish to become involved in a direct attack against Russia. Although Russia has become a major threat to Europe, NATO is currently in a strategic defensive position. If Trump wins the presidential election in 2024 and implements his policies, NATO's strength and influence may significantly weaken, creating a favorable situation for Russia. NATO's strength lies primarily in its integrated defense system, where the role of the United States is crucial. If the United States were to withdraw from NATO, in this scenario, Europe would need to enhance its military capabilities and collectively establish an effective defense system against Russia. Now the question remains, if Russia continues its aggressive policies and NATO remains indecisive, will another large conflict between Europe and Russia become inevitable?